And I don't know if you have been seeing, but Renata have us here with very time control. So I'm going to start right off.
Nice to see all of you. Good afternoon. And that's Maximo speaking, right?
Yeah, here.
Yes.
You're not seeing me. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, nice to
This
see
is
you.
Maximo,
Now I can see
Aditya.
you now.
Yeah.
Yes, hi, hello. How are you doing?
Very good. And thank you again, Aditya. So
Pleasure.
I jumped right into it because Renata, if not, during the previous panel, we were debating about sustainability development and of course focusing on decarbonization in the steel industry. I know that you consider climate change as probably the most important component of the long-term strategy in all our industry. So what's your general view as CEO of ArcelorMittal of this?
Sure. Look, at the end of the day, as you mean, I became CEO quite recently. And when you looked out at the world, climate is the biggest challenge facing this generation. I think we see it every day in our lives. I think everyone heard about everything that happened in COP26, all the attention that was paid to COP26 and all the announcements and all the initiatives. And we, at the same time, are aware that steel is a wonderful material. I mean, it's infinitely recyclable. We have a low carbon footprint. When you compare to aluminum, steel is 6 times lower. But just because of the sheer volume or sheer size of steel consumed, steel industry is one of the largest emitters of carbon. So it's quite logical, I think, for the whole steel industry and quite rational to focus on decarbonization. And I think the speaker before us was addressing exactly that. What are the ways that we can decarbonize the steel industry? What are the technologies that are available? What is the pathway? What is the process? At ArcelorMittal, I think the focus has been quite clear. We want to lead the steel industry in terms of decarbonization, not only in terms of product, but also in terms of process. So one of the first things we did this year was we tried to figure out where can we build or develop the world's first zero emissions steel facility. And in July of this year, we announced that in Spain. We have a mini mill in Spain, in Sestao, in the Basque region, which by 2025 will have zero carbon emissions, and we will be producing more than 1 million tons of flat rolled product. We also issued our climate action report, where we intend to reduce our emissions globally by 25%. And we are intending to spend about $10 billion in CapEx to achieve that. But all those actions are not enough. I think that's very interesting for a steel company or steel industry to do that. But what's interesting, I think, from my standpoint, is how do we create an ecosystem so that we remain at the forefront of technology? So along with these actions, we have created an X-Carb Innovation Fund, where we invest in new technologies, startups, early stage companies. So we invested in a battery storage facility. We have invested in electrolyzer technology, in new types of solar technology. We also partnered with Bill Gates in his Breakthrough Energy Catalyst Fund. I don't know if you've heard of that, Maximo. Yeah. But basically, his idea is that we have the demand for renewable power, for hydrogen, for sustainable aviation fuel. We have some of the technologies, but where are the projects? Because you need large-scale projects to make all of this a reality. So Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, where ArcelorMittal is an anchor partner, is going to fund these projects. So I hope that some of these projects see the light of day in Latin America, and we can see some of the hydrogen projects. I think there was a mention earlier of an announcement in Argentina, and those are exactly the types of projects that Breakthrough Energy will fund and support. So look, at the end of the day, all of us, the whole steel industry, including ArcelorMittal, is on a journey. But I think it's a very important journey because we have to save the planet. I think there's no question on that. And steel is a wonderful material and we've got to save it too. And so the only way to do that is to decarbonize our business.
Thank you very much, Aditya. And you were talking about the technology and the technology development, but do you see, I know it's in the long term, but do you see a cleaner winner in terms of the carbonization or technology for the steel industry? Do you see one or?
I wish it was so easy. I think we're all in the beginning of this journey, right? And there are 3 technologies or 3 pathways that I'm sure all of you are aware of it, so there's nothing new I'm going to add. The first is what we call at ArcelorMittal smart carbon. That's really taking the existing blast furnace and BOF route and then trying to attach a CCU or CCS. I read, I think in the previous slide, that Ternium is doing something on the DRI plant in Mexico. So it's the same concept. We have done that in our blast furnace operations in Ghent in Belgium. We have spent 200 million euro. And it's amazing because you take the CO2 and you convert it into bioethanol. And so you have captured all of the CO2. And the way you do it is you actually ferment bacteria. And you have these pots which have bacteria, and they literally eat the CO2 and convert it into bioethanol. So when you go to a steel plant, normally you would see metallurgists, electrical engineers, all types of other engineers. But now we have bioengineers in the steel industry. So that's one. The second, I think there's been a lot of conversation on is innovative DRI, which is using the DRI technology that exists today and injecting hydrogen. The good news is that it doesn't seem so difficult. It seems relatively doable. I'm sure you guys are working on that in Ternium and in other facilities or players across Latin America. We're also trying to do the same. We have announced projects in Spain, in Canada, in Belgium to establish DRI-based technology. The third, which would be a real winner or a new way of making steel, would be electrolysis. And so there's a company in Boston called Boston Metal, which is working on that. I know there are others who are doing the same. At ArcelorMittal also, we have a technology called Siderwin. We are going through pilot stages at this point in time, but that could be another very, very efficient way of making steel in a decarbonized way. So look, this is the start. I think all of these technologies, I say three pathways, but they will come together. There will be commonality. There will be things that we learn in terms of hydrogen in the DRI route. Maybe we can use it in the blast furnace, vice versa. But it's an ongoing journey and clearly a very critical journey.
And I mean, not all regions are the same in terms of where they are. The regions, the government, about decarbonization. No? Some are going forward at a much faster pace. Others have more resources. But as you are the head of a global business, how you challenge these differences in the decarbonization issue?
Yeah,
in different regions.
Yeah, an excellent question. So listen, we're all in the steel business, so we all know that we want a level playing field. What do I mean by level playing field? We want fair competition. We don't want our markets to be dumped. We don't want our markets to be subsidized. We don't want to have costs which the importer does not have. So what does that mean in terms of decarbonization? It means ideally a global carbon price, right? So that everyone pays the same carbon price. And then as you develop your technology, you develop your capability, obviously the more efficient producer wins and the producer with the lower carbon footprint. Absent that, when some regions have carbon pricing, like for example, Europe, what you need to do is set up a carbon border adjustment. And so I think in regions which are moving at much faster pace, they need a carbon border adjustment so that the existing steel producers can continue their decarbonization route. I think in regions which are not moving as fast, which may not have a carbon price at this point in time because they are still a developing nation, they still need to grow their business, grow demand of steel. I think there is room to advocate for policy in which there can be quick wins. How can we increase the efficiency? How can we develop technologies without a significant carbon price to at least begin and start on a decarb journey? So I would describe the world as in two speeds. One, where there's regulation certainty. I think in those regions, there's definitely a need to accelerate your decarbonization journey. In the regions where you have regulatory uncertainty, I don't think you do nothing. You definitely have to move, but maybe not at the same speed.
Very clear, Aditya. Let's move a little bit away from decarbonization, but still talking about sustainability. One of the themes of this conference is the evolution of work toward a more increasingly diverse and inclusive work. And I know you're doing a lot of things about it in ArcelorMittal, so why don't you tell us about this, Aditya?
Sure. Look, I think you almost know our strategy, because when we go through our strategy, the highest priority obviously is safety, followed by climate. And the third thing we've talked about is diversity, right? I think in terms of diversity, we do quite well because we are a global company. So if you come to a meeting in ArcelorMittal, you will always find lots of nationalities. Like in our management committee, there are about 10 nationalities. So it's, in that sense, we're diverse, but where we're not diverse enough is clearly on gender. On gender, what we have talked about is doubling the amount of women in ArcelorMittal in our management teams. Our management committee, which I talked about earlier, last year had no women on it, and this year has 2 women. So clearly we need to move, we need to do better. And I find the whole discussion very refreshing and very motivating. I think as we improve gender representation and as we double the amount of women in our management, I think people will be more motivated, they'll be more passionate, we will attract more talent. I think we'll have better idea generation. And overall, the organization will do very well. But I think the key in the whole diversity discussion is the I in it. So, you know, when we talk about diversity, we talk about D and I, and that is inclusivity. So as we have these goals as a company to double the amount of women in management, we also need to make sure that we have an inclusive culture. So as we make these steps forward, it becomes automatic. It does not become a goal. So I never have to be able to talk about this in the future because we have all the recruitment strategies. We have a work environment which is conducive to all cultures, to all genders, and it becomes inherent of our culture. And I think that's the shift. So I think the first thing is get the right numbers almost, and then make it inclusive enough that it becomes very natural. And we're on that journey. Very excited about that journey, but I think it's super critical in this day and age.
Thank you very much. One last question from my side. And then, if you have a little bit of time, we can move to question from the public or to the audience. But I'm going to change completely the subject and ask you about steel and some questions that I think our partners in Alacero and our customers would like to know. I mean, we have an industry that for the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, has been very volatile in the global steel. Have been very global. What are you expecting for the next decade? Do you feel the industry will be more sustainable from, I don't know, a profitable perspective? Do you see the same volatility going around? What is your vision?
So I wish the steel industry is more profitable, right? Over the next 10 years. I think we all do here. That would be great. But you know, we all have been in the steel industry for many years. The steel industry is inherently volatile. It is very cyclical. That's the nature of our business. And we have to survive in terms of that cyclicality and do well. But I would say that, hopefully I'm not wrong, but I am actually cautiously optimistic on the next 10 years. I think the last 10 years were clearly difficult. We had multiple crises on a global basis. I think the next 10 years will be different, not because we won't have crises, I'm sure we will, but I think it will be different for a few factors. I think we were talking about steel because we were talking about climate, and steel has a huge role to play in the whole climate discussion. And I think that connects to your question, because at the end of the day, as we transition the world and we decarbonize its energy grid, there will be more demand for steel. Right? Whether it's in solar or in wind or in hydrogen electrolyzers or pipelines, I mean, you name it. As we transition to a decarbonized world, there will be increased demand for these products. Maybe the whole car fleet will regenerate, and so you'll have more automotive steel demand, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a net positive for us as we look out for the next 10 years. I think the other bugbear in the steel business, as we all know, is supply of steel, right? That keeps on growing faster than demand. But perhaps people will be focused on how they decarbonize. And because capital is always limited, maybe some of the capital that would be used to grow is invested in decarbonization activity. And so therefore, if you have an environment in which supply remains positive, demand doesn't grow as fast, the next 10 years should be more positive. I think we see that happening in China today. So if you look at China post-COVID, you can see that China has not grown its production so rapidly. It is very focused on the CO2 emissions of its domestic steel industry. Exports have been reduced. And on top of it, the government has removed all the export rebates. So clearly focused on ensuring that the Chinese steel industry does not have the type of export presence it had in the past. So I think all those developments are very, very important. But again, I think Maximo, as you heard from the whole discussion we've had and the previous presentation, I think the real opportunity here is to make zero emission steel. I think that's the direction the world is going. And the faster we all move towards that, I think the better off we will be.
Great, very clear, and I hope you're right too, to be So if you have some time, Alejandro, I think we have a question from the audience.
Yes. Are you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you, Alessandro.
Hi, Aditya. Pleasure to have you here. This is Alejandro Wagner speaking, General Director from Alacero.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for joining us. We have many questions from the audience. We have almost 30,000 people hearing us from all around Latin America, so it's interesting to read the questions, but I will pick some of them. This is, for example, Cesar from Mexico, and he's asking an interesting question that we are still speaking about this in this Congress is, what types of government support can work for steel companies to accelerate their carbonization process? Again, we are seeing in Europe or many other regions some policies in order to accelerate this process. So what can you expect for us, for Latin America? What can you show from the example of Europe, for example, to maybe think about this in Latin America?
Sure, I think that's a great question. I think, look, in Europe, there are 4 areas of government support, and not all of it applies to what we would want to do in Mexico or in Latin America, but I'll get to that. In Europe, there's innovation funding. So for new technologies, there is direct grants. Number 2, there is a lot of financial funding. So for big projects, there is financing provided at low cost. They do this through the European Investment Bank. The third area of focus, which I think is perhaps the most important, is how do you create a level playing field? And I think that is most critical for the steel industry sustainability, and that is making sure that the carbon cost within, let's say in this case, Europe, matches the carbon cost of an importer. So there's a lot of discussion in Europe on a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And the fourth area of support, which is starting, and I would say is still in discussion phase, is how can you make the purchase of steel, green steel, a requirement? So how can you make it as part of product certification or government tenders? So I think that's really some of the areas that Europe is doing. In terms of Mexico and Latin America, I think all of these policies apply. Perhaps on the capital side, as these are developing nations, there may not be that much of capital available. But I think then the key is to create a level playing field. If we are going to implement a carbon price, make sure that is charged uniformly in the country, but also to importers, and then try and do government tenders where the requirement is for green steel, so you accelerate technology development as well as product availability.
Thank you, Aditya. Here we have another one, again from COP26. Of course, it's interesting to talk about that. Do you believe that we made a step forward in Glasgow? And then specifically speaking about the Glasgow steel breakthrough, what can you tell us about this initiative?
So I managed to go to Glasgow. So I was there about 10 days ago. I think the most impressive thing is how many more people attended now. So it just shows that there is a lot of activity, there is a lot of interest, a lot of world leaders show up, a lot of business leaders show up, and it just demonstrates the movement that the world is undergoing. In terms of Glasgow, look, it's you can see a glass half empty or a glass half full. I think it's half full. I think clearly not everything was achieved, but a lot of progress was made, right? Whether it was India announcing 2070 or around methane discussions or around a carbon offset regime. I think there's new Article 6 that's going to come, and that can be huge for Latin America because Latin America is endowed, especially Brazil, with a lot of forest land. And if there is a proper carbon offset scheme that can allow for a lot more investment and a lot of a level and fair play. But I think what is most interesting and why I would say that it was a success is that not all the goals were achieved. And normally after a COP, you say, okay, we will meet in 5 years, right? And then we will discuss how we can progress it. But because not a lot was achieved, everyone agreed that they would meet again next year. And I think that just shows the momentum, that we should not look at this as a 5-year missed opportunity, but as a journey. We made some progress this year, we'll make more progress next year.
Okay. Here we have some questions about you're very young, and maybe some other young people hearing you, maybe searching for some inspiration. So I will bring those questions into one. So my question would be, what can you say, what can you share a vision, a general vision, about working in an industry like this? Now I believe that we are competing from talent, from skills, from young people with other industries, with services mainly. So what can you tell us or tell them, to the young people, in order to work with this industry in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, look, everyone who is young and joining the steel industry, first of all, the steel industry will be very welcoming because not everyone wants to join the steel industry. So if you're young with fresh ideas, I think all the steel companies will welcome you, or you with open arms. I think you will bring fresh ideas. You will help the whole diversity discussion. You will help the whole sustainability discussion, the climate discussion. And we're looking for multi-talented people. Like I talked about the example of bioengineers. Yeah. And it's very interesting, your question, because when Maximo was asking about sustainability and diversity and inclusion, one of the things that I think about, and I appreciate your comments on my youth, but how do I remain connected to young people? Because I've been in the steel industry now for 24 years, and I want to be able to connect to the young people and hear from them exactly what are their ideas, their vision, because we have a generation shift, and it's very important to appreciate what they bring to the table. So I think to everyone who is young, number one, the steel industry will be very welcoming. The steel industry is much cleaner than you think it is, honestly. The steel industry is going to become much more diverse than it is today. And number four, as you are young and you have new ideas, I think we all have an obligation to capitalize on that and use that as an asset. So that's my key message, that please join us and you will love the journey. I mean, I think anyone who's in the steel business knows that once you join steel, it's very hard to leave it. So it's a fascinating, fun place to work.
Thank you, Aditya.
Aditya, thank you very much for joining us. I know you also have a tight agenda, so it was wonderful that you make time to be with us in Latin America. Thank you very much, Aditya.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you. I wish I could be there in person, but maybe next time. Maximo, everyone else, Alejandro, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate all of you. See you soon.
See you soon, Aditya. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.